Okay, so welcome to the Connecting Dots podcast, Eugenio and Dimitris. Thank you very much for taking the time. You two are both working at the Founder Institute. Dimitris, you are working at the Founder Institute in Oslo, and Eugenio, you in Darmstadt and Frankfurt, let's say, right?
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Christian.
Yeah. And I would like to start with a topic that we covered a lot, but maybe we can cover it briefly, startups in times of Corona. Because now we can look, we are still in times of Corona, but we can look back at the worst part we had in March and April, right? So how well or how bad do you think the startup ecosystems that you are working in, respectively, in Frankfurt and Oslo, how bad or how good do you think those ecosystems did in handling the Corona crisis?
Dimitri, you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So first of all, I don't know if you followed the Hack the Crisis. So there was a movement in many European countries, Hack the Crisis movement, and then the Pan-European Hack the Crisis, and there was funding for some of the solutions. So I was a mentor for that for two, via Oslo Business Region. So Oslo's Business Region pulled it together for Norway as one of the groups here locally anyway, and gathered some of the people who had already mentored for Oslo Business Region. So Oslo's Business Region began around 2014 and is being funded by the municipality, the metro region of Oslo, to help the startup community. And they have a variety of events and everything. So what we see here is that was just one reaction. And then, of course, you get a winner and they can go on and get funding and compete on a European level as well. And the winner here locally was the 3D printing plan for protective equipment, so that everything on site could be done quickly, so that everybody could be protected, especially in the healthcare sector, because of the supply chain issues. But on another level, because you can talk as well on various levels, like the ecosystem itself and some of the reactions, because you can think about the fact each particular location had its own shutdown, its own lockdown period. Ours was beginning on the 13th of March. So at that point, we had the Founder Institute running. I was also lecturing here at a local university. And so we couldn't have in-person sessions anymore. So everything went from the offline world, from the three-dimensional world to the two-dimensional world to the virtual world. And then, of course, you can think about some of our own startups, because we've had 3 cohorts here in Oslo and how they reacted. And so, one of them was Generation Mobility, and they were planning to launch a mental health platform later on in 2020 anyway. So they went ahead and rushed through to launch that platform so that the people who would be in lockdown, because if you've lost your job, if you're in an unusual situation, if you have people who are sick in your family, you have all these different stresses on your life, suddenly, even more than ever, then mental health became a point to the forefront. And they went ahead and had an early launch of their program so that people could start to use that platform for the first time right when they needed it most. And we have another startup from our first cohort as well, like Total Control. They were getting a lot of their income from the restaurant sector, which obviously was shut down as well here in Norway. So they altered their message so that people who might not have been using the solution, which is to have a digital control over the inventory, could have an understanding of what they could do and benefit and use their time wisely while they were being shut down, so that they could then get ready for the digital world of their inventory control and have a better control. In the long run, it would help their bottom line. So those are a couple of examples as well. And then the third point I'd like to make is about the Norwegian government approving funding so that businesses could have their continue to pay their employees. And that happened not only in Norway, but a lot of European countries did that, so that they could. It depended on the industry, of course. It wasn't that everybody could continue to go to work and get paid. even if they were working from home. But a lot of them were able to do so. So there wasn't as big of an unemployment spike as would have been otherwise.
Yeah. On top of that, I would underline the idea that Dimitri mentioned, that the mental health and psychological aspects of moving forward during this period were difficult. You know, when you're a founder in a startup, you're left to yourself to do a lot of the business creation processes. It's already a very stressful process mentally. There's a lot of uncertainty when you're moving forward with your company. The Corona crisis added to that. So individually, what I saw were people who slowed down their projects, had additional questions of how they were going to be impacted. There were a lot of questions around, would funding continue? You know, how do you get money when you can't meet with somebody face to face and pitch your projects? Hiring slowed down. But at the end, what we're seeing is really that the majority of these structures are being built by people who have attitudes around flexibility, addressing issues with the ability to change their structure or change their focus. So that initial concern is now one where I'm seeing more people are starting back up, moving forward, and then adjusting to the situation and the changes that it entails. I've heard a lot of people talk about opportunities coming out of the coronavirus. I wouldn't go so. I think that there are some, but I think a lot of it's more about adjusting to the new structures. I spent most of my time during this period out in Silicon Valley because of some family issues. So my own startups slowed down. We had a bit of a period of waiting it out, and then everything now is just kicking back up. So,
and
that really is what I see both in here in Frankfurt, but also out in Silicon Valley. Adjustments, and then everything started up again.
Yeah. In the startup space and also in other areas of business, people talked a lot about a time for reflection. It gives us an opportunity to reflect. Did you two use it in some specific way to reflect on what you're working on or how you're working on? So was it a time to reflect for you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in my primary company right now. One of my primary companies right now focuses on supply chain, and that became very visible in the news. There was a lot of activity around the supply chain crisis, the whiplash effect, and a lot of questions about getting products, particularly hospital products, to businesses. Rather than rushing in and starting new projects, we took a bit of time to address some organizational questions, meditate on how we were going to move forward, and then think about more midterm to long-term solutions rather than trying to be extremely reactive to the situation. Because in general, what I saw was a lot of people rushing to buy up masks, a lot of people rushing to solve problems where they weren't necessarily in place to have a solution. So there was a lot of churn around ideas, and we spent more time thinking about how we would organize ourselves midterm, long term.
And you, Dimitris?
For me, I was reaching out to the startups that we had from the first two cohorts. We were in the middle of the third one at the same time, and kind of worked with them, and then just to see an overview of how everything was, and to see how we might be able to help those, and see what the main struggles were and how the pivots were coming along for those who needed to pivot, or at least to adjust temporarily to things, and then to help them. And then, of course, it was a quiet time as well, just being able to enjoy simple things. The time, you could get out of the house to get some exercise, go on a bike ride or something like that was, I've always appreciated seeing the city a little bit without the movement, being one of the only ones out there in certain places. Also, if the weather was really good, I like to reflect early in the morning, because here we get these long days this time of year. So it was nice. Like at 5 a.m, there was a lot of daylight and so on, and being able to enjoy that a bit. But all of this connects so that you can appreciate and get some time, like you said, downtime to reflect, and then you could become creative later. So the consequences of all that are still to be digested to some extent as well.
Yeah. What behavior that you saw in the crisis in March and April in companies, is there a certain behavior, a certain mindset, certain interactions that you would like to see more of in the future? Because sometimes such a crisis is an incentive for better behavior, because people might need to reach out more to other people. So is there other certain things that you want to see more of in the future that you saw in the crisis now?
So I've been using Zoom for a bit earlier than the crisis, and I found that since I'm based between the US and Germany, I travel a lot. And the ability to run or interact a company via what we're doing now, video conferencing, became the norm for a lot of people during the crisis. And a lot of work can't be done through Zoom. So for the people who couldn't do work, that was very problematic. But a lot of roles and a lot of activity was possible through virtual meetings, through home office. To the extent where this is possible and desired by the individuals doing it, and the ability to have home office and to find a way to find a balance between the home office and the workspace. The coronavirus really pushed that forward and made it the standard. And I find that flexibility, not when it's required and you've been spending 40 hours bunkered down doing Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, but when it's really possible to have some flexibility, have some home office, be with family, I really would like to see that continue. I think that that's going to be part of the new culture in companies. The breakdown of those legal barriers that still exist. The coronavirus didn't remove them, but working from home has certain frictions in terms of when it's legal, what the requirements are, the risks in terms of insurance. Those still need to be addressed. But now that it's part of the way we do things, I'd like to see that continue and see how that can be built into standard working practices.
I'd like to build on what Eugenio just said, and then also talk about a second point. When people have a job where they have to commute so far, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of resources, a lot of strain. And of course, the argument can be that they need to be in the office to work as a team, to work on certain things together and to build that camaraderie. But if they can make that balance so that people could at least start to have some of the days a week that they can work from home, I think that would be a big benefit for those who have a really long and exhausting commute. And then the second point I'd like to make is about with the Founder Institute, with the pitching, because we were running the cohort. In Frankfurt, they had finished the cohort. And in Oslo, we were in the middle of running the cohort when this all happened. And so the big thing that happens then, everything has to go online and everything's via Zoom. And the pitch training is a big part of it, because when you get your message across, you can attract talent, you can attract investors, you can attract customers, partners, and so forth for your startup. Conveying the message is a really important part of this. And so when you're in person, there's a different dynamic, of course. And the training that we had been doing was really geared toward these in-person pitches. And then we had to do it toward online pitches. And now we're going to be online, 100% online this year. And so in order to make up for this, idea that we have everything online, in order to make up for what we've been missing, we're going to have these pitches every single week for all of the founders recorded. And so that is a really big plus, because we're going to be able to send these out to different mentors who might not have had the time to attend a certain session, but might be just the person that needs to see this message and give feedback on it because of industry experience and so on. So this is a really good benefit for the next cohort from Founder Institute, to have the opportunity to every week improve their pitch, improve their message, and also that we can be able to share those out with so many more people than would normally be if it's just in a room in person.
That is a very interesting point, because I wanted, when I heard you say that you moved the pitch training online, I wanted to make a point against it, because I thought maybe in real life interaction you can sense a lot more if the person is being authentic or not. But having it recorded is a big plus, because when you see yourself recorded, like I see myself now recorded, I see what kind of tics I have and what things I do that may not be good or may be good when I speak or when I articulate myself, So do you think overall it's a good thing? Or do you also miss the real life interaction? Because as I said, maybe you can sense better if the person is being authentic or not.
Definitely miss the real life interaction. That's a very important part of being able to communicate. It's not just the real life interaction, but it's also how you move within a space and how you interact with another person in a space. We're talking through a very flat screen. If I move my body or how I position myself within the space is going to be very different. And we are psychologically really built to be able to communicate with others by being close enough. Part of hearing is, and we'll talk about it later when we talk about languages, but part of hearing is also being able to watch a person's mouth. The whole coronavirus with the wearing of masks makes understanding more difficult. But within this space of communicating through a screen, I personally feel that I get much more value when I'm able to talk to somebody face to face. How you believe them or how they're going to pitch and communicate that idea. Are they reading a text? Are they being attentive? All those different things are much more difficult to tell on the screen than in person. And I've seen even the best pitch online is going to be less effective than a mediocre pitch face-to-face. So definitely miss it. Would like to see us getting back to it. But I also see the value of being able to do it asynchronously. Basically, being able to record something and share it has a lot of value. Being able to see what you've done and review it again has a lot of value. And, you adjust to the situation, basically.
Do you want to add something, Dimitris?
So definitely that I resonate with everything that Eugenio just said about the face-to-face. And I think that in the end, what's going to happen is when we go back to the in-person sessions, we recognize the value that we've gained from these recordings, and we implement that as an integral part of the ongoing system. And so that way you get the best of both worlds, because you can take those clips and send them out to the people as a way of a teaser, for example, and then you can get that introduction, that face-to-face introduction, if that teaser works and so forth. So it can have a lot of value, and especially a lot of people might now be interested in cross-investment more than ever before. There is a potential there that investors who have been insisting on face-to-face meetings might be a little bit more open now to investing with startups that they haven't met except for virtually. And if that proves itself to be a part of the accepted path, shall we say, then that would be also great. We have had people from other countries invest in our startups here in Norway. So it has already been to some extent validated in the last 2 to 3 years here in Oslo. But I think on a larger scale, beyond the earliest stage of angels and so forth, it might also be the next thing as well.
When you go back to in-person pitch training at the Founder Institute, will you then also record the in-person meetings, so then you could translate the pros that you have now to the post-corona situation, right?
Yes, we've been doing that for 10 years actually, globally.
Okay.
So yeah, and then they get to look at those pitches and they get to see and improve on them. So the founders are always going back and improving. Again, they're improving on their body language, their in-person pitch and so forth. So we just haven't been taking these and sending them around to mentors like we're going to do this time. So these links are going to be available and we'll be able to send them out, and the mentors will be able to give feedback on them, not just the people who are in the session, but even beyond.
Okay.
And Christian, an important point there is also the idea around data privacy. Sharing information or sharing a pitch, you need to be comfortable that that information is going to be shared. And in the last cohort, we had individuals who didn't want to be recorded, who didn't want that the recording to either be for themselves or to be shared. And we need to be respectful of that. It's very important that the data privacy requests from cohorts participants be followed, but also that when you do share a video or when you record something and it goes out there into the world as a potential positioning of your company for investment, we need to be attentive to the idea that that might change over time. So if you sent out a pitch 6 months ago and then your company has pivoted or your positioning has changed, you should be able to address that information or limit how long it's available in terms of how you're positioning your company. That information is not necessarily something you want to keep on the record for the rest of your company's life. So it's also important to be able to keep those thoughts in mind.
I see.
Good point.
Yeah. So I would like to move on to the new vertical you're working on, and I would like to ask for an explanation, first of all, what a vertical is when you speak of a vertical. Keep in mind that we are talking now in the startup space, and we have a lot of slang and a lot of words that the people outside don't know. So a layperson that doesn't know anything about a startup, how would you explain a vertical to them?
Sure, I'll take this one to start with. So if you think about a program like the Founders Institute, to explain something that's vertical, you have to explain something that's horizontal first. So if you think about the Founders Institute, it's the world's largest accelerator. I know Pedro talked about it a little bit. He explained how it's organized. But if you think about this program that we generally run, it's a 14-week program. It's intended to help people move an idea to a business. So we really, in this 14-week period, you may come in with an idea or you may come in with an existing business project that's already started. At the end of the 14 weeks, you will have a solid company in place, organized in the areas from customer to product to your internal organizations through a series of sprints. And you're going to be able to move your project forward, maybe get funding, maybe focus on scaling, but you're able to do that for whatever idea you want. You're able to do that for whatever business concept that you want. So it's end-to-end horizontal for any business, any business area. Some business areas are more complicated because they're regulated, but overall, across the board, you're able to work and create your business and move that forward. When we talk about a vertical, the idea is that we're focusing either on a business sector, a client, a potential customer, or a technical stack in such a way that you need a very specific knowledge set or a very specific focus. In Canada, there's a vertical focused, the Founder Institute just started a vertical in the supply chain area, where companies that are involved either in supply chain tech or developing supply chain services are going to be supported by experts in that area. So when we talk about a vertical, is that we're bringing in experts in a specific area to help run the program. So you do the normal 14-week program. You have some special classes or special sessions to deal with the issues in that sector, and that's why we call it a vertical.
I see. Okay. And what kind of vertical are you working on now? You told me before we had this interview that you're working on a new vertical in the area of culture and languages, right?
Dimitri, why don't you talk about how you brought up the idea to me and then developed the idea and why you've joined the Frankfurt team?
Yeah, absolutely. So Eugenio and I both have experience in the field. Eugenio with developing an application in the space. Me, myself, as the sponsorship coordinator of the Polyglot Gathering for 3 years, and also as the Congress coordinator of the Society of Intercultural Education, Training and Research's Congress, the largest intercultural congress in Europe, which was in 2017 at Dublin University. It takes place every 2 years, Dublin City University. Also a sponsorship coordinator for that Congress, as well as later sitting on the board, so in 2018 and 2019. So these spaces also sometimes working as an intercultural coach for carters, getting to use my Brazilian Portuguese language skills from time to time for people from the oil industry, from Brazil who moved to Norway and so forth as they need to adapt. Because although they employ themselves, they speak English and will use English as a working language, the family doesn't necessarily speak English at that level. So somebody like me can help and so on. So there aren't a lot of people necessarily in Norway speaking Portuguese and also having that background. So I sometimes get called in for these little assignments in addition. But anyway, all of this is, the point is that it's an industry that I have a lot of experience in, a large network in. And when you want to do something like this, you need to team up with people. You don't just do this alone out of nowhere. So the logical thing was me to reach out to Eugenio. I talked to Eugenio about setting up the Founder Institute in Frankfurt anyway at some point, and he successfully set it up, pulling a team together and bringing his team in together and setting up and running a cohort in Frankfurt already. So it was a natural fit for me to reach out to Eugenio and to bring on this idea because of our network and experience, to start to bring the experts together. So we've been adding mentors together. For example, we have Italki. So the founder of Italki is Kevin Chen. We have Gabriel Weiner. He's the founder of Fluent Forever. And we have Arkady Zilberman, PhD, who has Language Bridge technology. And we have Peter Gallant, who founded Innovative Language. And we have actually somebody from our own Founder Institute. So he attended the Founder Institute in Berlin, and he already mentors for the Founder Institute, and he founded Tandem. And I don't pronounce his last name very correctly, so I'll probably have to look it up, or maybe get your help to pronounce his last name. His first name is Tobias, and he's the founder of Tandem. So far we have several people who have agreed to mentor for us, and I'm just pulling up his last name. Help us with his last name, if you will, Christian. His last name is spelled Dickmeis. Sorry.
I didn't get the last few ones.
Dickmeis. Mice? Is that Dickmeis?
Eis. Dickmeis. Yeah, Dickmeis.
Dickmeis. Okay. So we have a few mentors already committed, and we're going to have more who are thinking about it. And then, of course, the next step is to bring the people together. So we have some people that we've been reaching out to, people who want to learn more. And I think if we can get around 3 startups or more in this space, that's already a good starting point. We'll be able to go ahead and continue on. That means that the mentors will be more than the founders around the topics. And we also have some ideas of startups. So if people actually don't have their own startup concept, but instead they just want to join a team in this space, they could be looking at the startups that are coming in, or they could be looking at the concepts that we might throw out there. One concept is to revolutionize the language testing space and to disrupt that, because it is a very inefficient space to test somebody in a language. You have to test four areas. Of course, you have to test the speaking and the listening and the reading and the writing. And then you have the scale. So the scale of the European framework of language goes from A1 all the way to C2. And so what does that mean and what level? And then what the person getting the test is going to have as a result out of that, and what they'll be able to do. So usually it means they're able to do a certain job, they're able to study at university, and so on. And there are some issues with these tests. There's one test, of course, known as the TOEFL test. Mm-hmm. And the issue that Arkady Silberman has is that people let's say they're in China, they take the TOEFL test. They pass the TOEFL, they get accepted to university in the United States, and then they fail at being able to study in English at university in the States. And then they go home. And because the test said that they would be able to, but in the reality, they weren't able to follow the courses in that language and so forth. So that's another point. So the point of the validity of the test, and the other point of the process. The person should be able to pay a reasonable fee, get an actual answer out of the test that is effective, and then move on. And so showing the levels, all 4 of the levels, without having to pre-choose where they think they should go, and then have to spend all this time. Usually you're spending all this energy learning how to take the test. You're spending more time proving that you can pass the test than you are actually proving your language skills. And these are all issues that need to be disrupted.
So Dimitri gave you one example of a possible project in this space. But so what we're really doing is creating the opportunity to create new businesses in the language area. So language learning, communications, translation, because both Dimitri and myself are quite involved in the polyglot community. Have a lot of access to business leaders in the area of language learning. Dimitri proposed to me this project, and it seems quite natural. I personally worked in the area of developing language apps to help people learn new alphabets, and also for immigrants coming to Germany to be able to learn the initial German vocabulary from places where typically there weren't very many tools to learn early German vocabulary. So if you were a Sorani speaker and you wanted to have something as a available dictionary to help you learn some of the early phrases and words that you need as an immigrant, those tools didn't exist. So I worked on developing that a little bit. I worked on people learning alphabets. So with that experience and what Dimitri has also in terms of not only language, but also culture, we decided to build this vertical up. And we're really excited about it because not only are we getting some interest from several mentors that want to participate as thought leaders in the program, but also from potential founders that want to start the program with us. So I think we're going to have a very successful semester in terms of bringing people forward in the area of new companies and new businesses in the language space.
Is there a place already online where people can check out this kind of vertical? Are there any resources or articles about it?
It's quite fresh. The place to go to see the general program is fi.co Frankfurt, and Dimitri and myself will be publishing a couple of information items in the next days in terms of follow-up. We'll send you the links to that so that you can add them to the description of your video.
And I also want to encourage everybody to follow you two on LinkedIn to keep up with what you're up to, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. Good. And I would like to add that we three, I think we speak about, combined, we speak about 20 to 25 languages. And my contribution to this is by far the smallest because I speak barely 3 languages. So Dimitris, how many languages do you speak?
I think I've studied more than 20. And then as a working language, I guess you can say 8 working languages, but of course some of them are lower working levels than others. So here in Norway, I'm registered as an interpreter. Sometimes I do help people with interpreting. So there's an organization called Tolkenet, and I'm registered to interpret with them for Greek and Spanish and Italian and French. They really don't need anybody for English, so I'm not registered with them for English. So then you've got Chinese and Portuguese. I mentioned that sometimes I work as a cross-cultural coach to help families from Brazil moving to Norway. My Chinese is HSK4, so that's a working level. You still need HSK 5 and 6, so I don't know if I'll ever get there unless I live again in the Far East. I made most of my progress back in the 90s in Taiwan when I lived there, and then ever since there, I've been, still working with it. And then you've got some other languages after that. So Catalan is a fairly easy one because of all of the experience I have in Romance languages. Then you kind of throw in your Swedish and Danish because living in Norway, then you get those two kind of as a gift to some extent, but then you've got different words to deal with. Then I've got the Dutch and the German at intermediate levels, but not really strong enough to work in. Maybe I could work as a waiter in Dutch or German, but that's about it. And then you've got Turkish and Russian, which are not as good. Probably I could work as a dishwasher or something in those languages. Then I've got some caveman languages. Tagalog, Bahasa Indonesia, Bahasa Malaysia, a bit of Cantonese, a bit of Japanese. Did the Pimsleur course for Syrian Arabic. Did a little bit with Hundur and Lenka, trying to revive a dead language, working with some people like Alan King and Richard Simcott for a while. The project became politicized, unfortunately, and didn't continue. And Alan King has also passed on. And so, yeah, some different experience. Some dabbled with a bit of Finnish and Lithuanian, and dabbled a bit with Latin. And yeah, that's about it. So the only strong non-European language I have is Chinese, is Mandarin Chinese.
Yeah. So I speak just German and English. My English is fairly okay, I would guess. My Spanish is rather medium, I would say. Eugenio, you speak about 4, 5, 6, you told me, right?
Yeah, so I'm not as impressive as Dimitri in terms of the studying and the languages that he's done. I like to say when people ask me, how many languages do you speak? My answer is, yeah, I've forgotten. I've studied more and forgotten more than I've actually retained, which is really true. I mean, language learning is hard. So I've always had an interest in languages, and I've spent time studying a whole bunch of languages where today I'm unable to say anything other than the most basic, hello, how are you? My core languages are the classical European 4. I understand, also can read and listen to Portuguese and Italian, so that brings me up to 6 in understanding and reading. And I love listening to Portuguese podcasts because there's some very funny podcasts in Portuguese. But I'm not I couldn't communicate on a business level in either of those languages. So I'm a very passive listener. And then mostly nowadays, My focus has been now in the last 2 years to focus on much smaller languages or minority languages, simply because I find that there's less opportunity to learn them and there's less opportunity to support them. So I've been interested in indigenous and minority languages for quite a while. My personal focus has been to try to learn and be active in those languages these last couple of years. And I think that if we come back to the idea of the vertical, that's definitely in the area of language learning or communicating. Minority languages is definitely an area where there are businesses that focus on that, but there's also a huge opportunity to create new activity, new businesses, new ways of teaching these languages that need support. So if somebody comes along and says, hey, I'm interested in minority languages, they should contact me. I would love to support projects in that area and help bring focus to things like indigenous languages in my home country in Mexico, or languages like Ladakhi, which is one of the languages I try to learn. It's a Tibetan, it's one of the Tibetan languages. So I find that there are, of the 7,000 languages that exist around the world, we really only teach a very small percentage of them. It would be great to have people working on the larger set of languages that get very little or no attention.
Yeah, yeah. So when you two have so much experience in learning languages, what do you think are some of the most common mistakes people make when wanting to learn a new language?
I think the common mistake is not being motivated and not understanding why they're doing it in the first place.
Yeah.
And then along those lines is goal setting. Because if you goal set, you can tie it into your motivation and your reason to do it. And if you don't really have a reason to do it, then any goals you set won't really make any sense in the first place. And then eventually you're not going to get those goals done, and then you're just going to give up.
Christian, I could talk for hours about language learning. I would say, in terms of common mistakes, I would mention 3 things. Dimitri mentioned motivation, and I completely agree with what he's saying. Motivation is also related to enjoying the process. So if you're going to learn a language and and you're finding it very painful, then you're going to stop. So figure out a way of making it an enjoyable process, whether it's, it's part of your coffee routine, whether it's something that you integrated into your daily routine. It should bring every day a little bit of joy. I talked about the Portuguese podcast. The only reason I listen to them is because these guys are funny. They have lots of phrases. I love how they turn the language and how they use the language. So that's why I listen to those podcasts. I wouldn't be learning a language if I didn't have content that I found interesting. So you have to find something interesting. The other thing is you need to learn how to learn. It's very easy to get stuck just using whatever tools are out there, and without going into this tool is good or bad, or that's the best tool or that's the worst tool. You need to figure out a way that whatever tool you are going to use, you're going to use on a regular basis, and that it fits your needs. So if you want to be somebody who speaks, then using an online tool that only talks to you, that's not going to help you speak. Mm-hmm. If you want to learn a language because you're going to be reading it, then you should be reading it. If you're going to be focused on output, then you should be doing your output. The other, learning to read and learning to listen, is important for language learning. But if you want to communicate with those languages, then you need to talk and use the tools that push you to work on your weaknesses, which would be then simply my third point. In order to work on your weaknesses, you need to identify them, but also you need to deal with fear. learning a new language is really, and being able to speak in a new language is a lot of it is really around managing your own fears. If I want to speak in French or if I want to speak in Portuguese, I really need to be comfortable with the idea that I'm going to make mistakes and then just go for it. And that's not an easy thing to do.
Which is also very important for running a startup, right? Being comfortable
Absolutely.
with failing, with getting bad pitch reviews and improving. So maybe there's a big correlation between a person, or I mean, not necessarily a person who's good at learning languages is good at running a business. That not, but maybe there are some implications that are good for, doing the other thing.
Definitely. The idea that you're going to, so overcoming fear and focusing on a business, you need to get out of your own way when you're creating a business. You're going to have self-limiting fears or self-limiting concepts. Is my business going to grow? Should I invest now? How much energy should I put into this? In this same stance when you're learning a language, if you need to be able to say, okay, I'm going to project myself into the future, 5 months from now, 6 months from now, this is what I'm going to be able to do, or this is what my company is going to be able to do, and then figure out how am I going to get there. And you're only going to get there in terms of language learning is if you put yourself out there and talk, and in terms of your business, if you put yourself out there and do the initial necessary spend, if you're hiring or investing, reaching out to people to pitch your ideas, reaching out to customers, understanding what they're doing or what they need. There are very large similitudes about being able to put yourself into the future, project yourself, and then focus to bring that reality forward.
All right, so we were talking about intercultural things now, more or less. I would like to speak a bit with you about a comparison of startup ecosystems, because even I, as somebody who is really not an expert on startups, know that startup systems can be dramatically different, right? And so the US is usually seen as, with Silicon Valley, as the forerunner in terms of startup ecosystems, because a lot of big companies get founded and built there. So how would you two, I think you two have both experience in different startup ecosystems, right? On different continents, right?
Me, myself, I have my experience based in Oslo. I did a module in Berkeley through the MBA that I did here at Norwegian Business School. So it was a global MBA, which sent us to Singapore, Madrid, and to University of California, Berkeley, Haas School of Business. But most of the modules were here in Oslo. And so the whole thing was on entrepreneurship and innovation in Berkeley. So we got our exposure to the ecosystem there. And of course, being a part of the Founder Institute, setting up the Founder Institute, we get our exposure via Founder Institute to this ecosystem there and the people that we send there, because we have had people go there and spend time benefiting from that ecosystem as well, meeting with the people at Founder Institute headquarters, getting the introductions and so forth. They can all use the space at Silicon Valley as well. So if they need a working space and an address, a physical address to have meetings or to work from, they get that benefit as well. So in a very tangential way, I have that exposure, but the majority of my exposure is actually right here in Oslo.
But Eugenio, you have the direct comparison between Silicon Valley and Frankfurt, right?
Yeah, since I spent time between both Silicon Valley and here, they are very different cultures. In the US, there are so many meetups, organizations, events, places where you can really interact with other people who are doing similar things. There is definitely a coffee culture, or the possibility of meeting, before coronavirus, possibility of meeting somebody very quickly to have a meeting about a specific subject. And Related to that, there are tools, services, and money available to really move forward startup ideas in the Silicon Valley culture. It's really part of, it's not surprising to see somebody who has been in 7 or 8 startups and that sees naturally the idea of, oh, well, this didn't work, but I'm now doing this, not so much as a failure, but more of an innovative path. I tried this, it didn't work, I'm moving forward. That culture and that attitude in Germany is a little bit more reserved, both in people who enter the startup world, but also if you think about it a little bit about the infrastructure, it's much more difficult in Germany to create a company. There are barriers to equity exchange, and the structures to do that are always a little bit more complicated. It's not impossible. You know, definitely we see it in the environment where people do create startups. They're able to push forward with that. There is a lot of activity in Frankfurt, and Frankfurt has been a very dynamic and active ecosystem. You spoke with Pedro a couple of weeks ago. He's very active in the environment. He's bringing that forward. There are a lot of actors that either focus on very specific areas, or whether it's mentorship, whether it's specific technologies, or just the legal aspects of creating companies. That's definitely there. At the same time, it's not as frothing as the Silicon Valley culture is, where the opportunities are just very vast. But I would say that the positive aspect of a smaller community is the interconnected aspects of it. The people in Frankfurt tend to know each other much better. It's much easier to say to somebody, you know, to get this done, go to this person, because you're able to identify good actors that are in a smaller community. You're able to identify good actors that are going to move projects forward. In the Silicon Valley aspect, there's so much activity going on that it's difficult to identify the leaders from the wannabes. Surprisingly, you're going to have a lot of people who are just surfing the idea of being an entrepreneur. So both cultures have their positive aspects, and both cultures have really some of the issues concerned with, you know, Frankfurt might be getting up to speed, moving forward, finding technical capabilities. But nowadays, especially in the post-corona space, where you're virtualizing companies or virtualizing resources, it's easier to find resources elsewhere. And the Silicon Valley barriers are going to be, you know, it's very costly living there. It's very difficult to create a structure without funding, because your engineers or your teams are going to have costs that are much higher there than they are here. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah. You already mentioned a point that people living in Silicon Valley criticize a lot. I know that because I follow a lot of investors and founders from Silicon Valley. They complain a lot about the politics of the city there. They see some they see some restrictions there, and also they see the rent going up a lot. And now with COVID-19, they see, well, we can be anywhere and this can still run very, very well. So now they question, do we really need a super expensive office on Sand Hill Road? Do we really need a super expensive apartment that is way too small in SF? So maybe COVID-19 will now force those changes that would have otherwise been coming along more slowly, right?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of remote teams and remote work when it's well structured. So I've been following some of the companies like Doist that really focus their energy in creating a strong remote environment that is also respectful of the employee. And when that's done properly, that can be a great culture builder and a great environment that allows people to, you don't just work, you have family, you're going to deal with personal concerns. So being able to do that properly will move people and projects out of Silicon Valley. Clearly, it's an environment that, although it's great to be there, great to work there, there's a lot of interpersonal connectivity that's possible. Being also able to create remote teams and have structures that are all over the world is becoming more and more a reality. And yeah, I think that is going to happen, Christian. I see that those pressures building up over many years now, and attitudes are definitely changing.
What other US city do you see succeeding in being a startup hub? Is it maybe Austin, Texas?
People talk about Austin. There's definitely a lot of activity in New York, in Chicago. I have some friends in Colorado that are working on startups. I think that what you're seeing is that there are a lot of micro hubs, and they might be focused on either a specific local problem. I remember just recently seeing a pitch from a VC project where they are focusing on investing in Midwest companies, and they did the research, Southern Midwest companies, and they did the research of identifying returns and cost structures on these companies in this area, and found that they had often better returns or faster growth cycles than Silicon Valley, on average, than Silicon Valley companies. Now, whether that's true or not, or whether that's just advertising for their venture, I don't know. But clearly, there is at least for the US, there's really an attitude that you can create a startup anywhere. And that's something that the Founder Institute really supports. We're present in 140 cities or more now. And the idea there is really to be able to create a company or an ecosystem that supports company building almost anywhere in the world.
Dimitris,
is there anything you would like to add here?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that makes Scandinavia unique is with the welfare states. So in Norway, for example, if you have a job and you're not really happy with it, and you want to start a business, you could quit your job, or if you lost your job for another reason, then there's a different setup. So I think it's about 3 months after you've quit your job, you're eligible for unemployment here in Norway. And if you lose your job, you're eligible with probably a week or two of a delay. And so if you are getting unemployment benefits, then you can still go ahead and work with the unemployment office. And if they approve what you are going to do, you can build up a business. And while you're not getting any income from the business, you could, in theory, be getting unemployment benefits. So that's one thing that makes this unique. So it's less risky, in other words, to do a startup in Norway than it is in many other countries in the world. The second thing is that the Norwegian government is also encouraging with a lot of different initiatives all the way into high schools. So there's an organization called Entrepreneurskap, and they are working with a lot of the high schools, and then some of these projects are being implemented. Entrepreneurskap means young entrepreneurship in Norwegian, and they are working with a lot of the youth, and then also into the university level for bachelor students. So that means that people are already being experimental with ideas. Sometimes in high school, they're forced into teams to work together, and then they get mentors through the community, and I've mentored for them a few times as well. And then they have some hackathons and some pitch contests and so forth, and some actual funding that they get in the form of a check for the best, for the winners of the projects and so forth. So these are oftentimes not necessarily scalable businesses, but it's a great thing to see that there's a bit of a sandbox, if you will, for people to learn early and experiment early on. And part of this has to do as well with the overall strategy in Norway, because Norway is a country that has a lot of the income from the oil industry and offshore. And so with that, they know that someday it will run out. And also they know that with the sustainability issue and the pressure, it's also not the best way to be getting our energy needs met. So for those two reasons, they are pushing for other things to take over. And so their funding that I also early in the conversation talked about Oslo Business Region. I mentioned how Oslo Business Region has existed for about 6 years, pushing a variety of events, promoting a variety of events and initiatives for startups and scale-ups and learning and so on about this. So all of these are parts of the ecosystem. In addition, there is the Innovation Norway. So Innovation Norway has offices not just here in Norway, but other parts of the world as well, including in Silicon Valley and different parts of Europe and also in the Far East and so on. So they're always promoting Norwegian businesses and Norwegian trade. And so startups can get grants. It's fairly easy to get a grant for roughly 15,000 euro, yeah, more or less, as an early grant. And then more difficult to get the next grant level, which is about 70,000 euros, because you have to have matching funds. So either friends and family, or maybe angel investors or other investors, or maybe your own money that you've put in, or maybe you've already managed to scale a little bit, but and get some customer money by that point. But usually it's still fairly early. So these are all ways that the ecosystem works. And I'd also like to say that in Norway, a lot has to do with the universities. So universities sometimes have incubators and also co-working spaces affiliated with them and research labs that help contribute a great deal in Norway to the ecosystem. One of the ways that you find that's a common overarching thing that you'll find in many ecosystems is Techstars. So we have a strong Techstars here, and also they are always supporting Startup Weekend. So as Founder Institute locally here, we've sponsored 2 Startup Weekends so far. So these hackathons are always an inspiration, a great place to meet people and to exchange ideas. And the final point I'd like to make is about Startup Norway, because we just had another Startup Extreme. So they go to a place called Voss in the western part of the country, and they engage in a lot of action adventure sports, like whitewater rafting is one example. So they beamed in this year because of COVID-19. They downscaled a lot, and they had all the pitching available openly online, and then they beamed in a lot of the activity. So whether we'll see a more open participation in the future if they decide to do this in the future, because they encourage angel funding. They do angel fund training, so angel investor training. And another difference is here in Norway, the accredited investor doesn't exist. So they just want to make sure that have you followed in the US how you have to be an accredited investor to be an angel investor? Versus here in Norway, you just have to make sure that you're not in a risk zone of going bankrupt and so on. So there's a certain level of risk that it's easier to take and say, okay, you can risk this amount of money, like let's say 5,000 euros or something. And it's easier to do that here in Norway than it is in the United States. In the United States, like Republic.co, the limit is $2,500 per year. That if you're not an accredited investor, you could put into an investment like that. In Norway, it's a larger amount that you can risk without having to go through those hoops. And the very, very last point is the options. This is something that there's a big discussion about in Norway, because options in Norway can be taxed before they're actually liquid. So if there's no market for the option and you have a big tax event, then it's going to be a disaster for you. So people here in Norway are not very keen on issuing options, because they know that there could be a tax consequence that could be disastrous. So they're having discussions in Parliament, and there are groups that meet all the time to try to put pressure on Parliament to release that. And so far, not enough has been done. So far, you won't find the issuance of options as a way to motivate people, because nobody wants to be stuck with something that's not yet liquid, but yet you have a tax consequence on it.
Mhm. And Eugenio, what in the Frankfurt startup ecosystem, what would you like to see more of? What do you think is missing here? What aspect that maybe works in Silicon Valley very well would be good here? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, so one of the things, I recently looked into creating a small holding company here in Frankfurt. And the processes of doing that, and it's very important to have the flexibility to have the infrastructure necessary to be able to, have the legal aspects of creating companies and having the support to do that. And the FPS is our local legal partner, and they've been doing a great job of supporting us in helping our founders build companies. But the aspect that I'm seeing that is missing in Frankfurt, and that's very easy to do in the US, when you create a company here, you have to go through a bit of a different steps to do so. It has its costs and whatnot. You have to keep money aside to do so. But there are little things that become blocking elements. It's very easy in the US to find a legal business address. For example, if you're going to be moving around, you need a virtual legal address. The cost of doing that in the US is very low. You can pay $10 to $20 a month and you have a virtual address. Being able to do that in Frankfurt or in the surrounding towns and have somebody or an infrastructure that allows you to find a virtual address that's going to be a legal business address is much more complicated and much more expensive. So it's those little things. Overall, the ecosystem is fantastic. You've got great people, but little barriers like that become big barriers. So whether it's tech, whether it's meeting people, whether it's rental space, whether it's the contractual services, figuring out that there is enough volume of clients to assure that those services exist and make it easy to create companies. I'd like to see more of that in not only in Frankfurt, but in the entire German and European ecosystem, because while those companies are being built up or those businesses do exist, they tend to be small. They tend to be difficult to find. Their volumes aren't quite there compared to the 170,000 addresses in the US where you can create a legal entity. So things like that, I'd like to see a little bit more, making it easier, making it smoother, so that somebody who wants to create a company doesn't have to spend hours searching on the internet for how do I create a legal business address, what do I have to think about, what are the limitations, and then finally, oh, it's going to cost me more than I can afford per month to do so.
Yeah. Dimitris, is there something that you could think of in Oslo that would be good to have more of, or that would be good not to have?
I think more training. So people tend to invest a lot in real estate. So more training, like we have the Nordic Business Angels program, and then Startup Norway, which has its Angel Challenge program. Training investors, having pitching programs, and then awarding to support startups. We're already on a good start. We just need it to go more, to go to the next step. So more and more people will be incentivized. And I think that once at some point we get this law changed with the options, that we're going to get a better step in that direction as well. So it's a combination of changing the law around options so that people can motivate people with options and not worry about the tax liability until you actually have the money available to pay those taxes, not just because it's an illiquid option on paper that's gained some value and you have a tax bill coming up. And the other point with more and more training, so that the startups, the long-term payoff with people investing in startups will be more attractive than the people who are investing in real estate, because there's something of a bubble going on here with the real estate, and it's just so much more comfortable for so many people here in Norway to use that as an investment. vehicle. And that's going to prevent the innovation from happening as fast as it could.
Yeah. So in the final part of our interview, I would like to discuss pitching, which is always an exciting topic to talk about with founders and investors, because everybody can learn from it. I always point out to my audience that we all pitch ourselves in some way when we discuss something with family, friends, colleagues. We always have to present ourselves, sell an idea, sell our opinion on it. So pitching is something that we all have to do. And pitching in the startup world, especially in Founder Institute, follows some certain steps and has a certain setting, right? I discussed it with Pedro in about 8 or 9 episodes of my podcast ago. There's a certain way of judging pitches in the Founder Institute program, right? Could any one of you please explain this way of judging or reviewing pitches, please?
Sure. I guess I'll start. Dimitris, let me know if I forget anything. The idea around pitching, it's like you say, Christian, the Founder Institute focuses a lot of energy on pitching. And initially, when I went through the process of learning how the program is run, and I asked myself, is this really a gadget? Why are they doing this? But it's like you say, it's something that you do all the time. You're going to pitch your company, the elevator pitch. You're going to pitch your company to potential employees, not only just investors, colleagues. Whenever you talk about your project, you should be able to talk about it in such a way that is engaging. So pitching is something we constantly do when we're looking for support of any kind. So the way the Founder Institute has set up the pitching process is that everybody pitches, and everybody's required to be able to present their project 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, without slides, with slides, and to be able to give the details in a very short period of time in such a way that the person in front of you is interested in your project is not an easy thing to do. So the Founder Institute pitching process is one where you present, and then the judges are the mentors that are present that day are going to give you feedback. But the first thing they do is they give you a score between 1 and 5, where 3s are not allowed. So it's either positive or negative. If it's 2 and below, there's something that's not quite right. If it's 4 or 5, it's a very strong positive signal. 1 really means you really need to go back and redo your pitching, think about what you've presented. It's not working. 2 is okay, but there's significant issues, and I wouldn't be that interested. 4 is it's a good pitch. I'm interested in what you're doing. I think you're going to move forward. Getting a 5 from somebody really means, wow, this is great. I'm ready to put money behind your project, or I'm ready to work with you. I'm ready to invest my time and energy to help you move forward. So 5s tend to be rare. People get more 2s and 4s, and then a discussion of what works and what doesn't work. Dimitri?
I think you summarized it. Yeah, you summarized it really well, the philosophy that we have behind the scoring. And I like to use it as a way to match people up to advisors. We have an advisor agreement called the FAST agreement. It's fi.co/FAST. So the founder, the standard template, it's a founder agreement standard template. And what this means is that it's an easy way for people to visualize if they're going to be an advisor for that startup, that the startup founder and the advisor can engage really quickly in a dialogue about how that advisor will bring something to the table and how they're going to get a piece of equity in that startup for that time and expertise that they're spending, and to what extent. So it's an easy way to begin the dialogue. And I like to use the pitching as a way to connect to the people before, so that the advisors as Eugenio mentioned, you give a score of a 4 or 5, you're really excited about it. So there are points where I like to say, okay, if you're going to give a 4, you're going to be an advisor. Otherwise, don't give a 4. And then we follow up with them and we connect the advisors to the founders after the session. And we give them the link to that template so they could begin the dialogue from there around this possibility. And so this is a lot of power of that network that we have. And I think that this is going to be with the virtual sessions, where I mentioned that we're going to have every week all the founders giving us links to their video pitches, and we're going to be able to share those out with the mentors. This is going to even be more powerful, because usually we're only going to have, unless it's a mentor idea review or a mentor progress review, it's usually only three mentors in the room per session. And now we have more and more potential to keep sending those links out to interested mentors. And you don't need to worry so much about whether that mentor is able to attend that particular session. You're able to send that out and get the feedback from the right mentors over there, and potentially advance with regards to the advisors that these startups will be able to bring on board as well. Even faster, in other words, advance faster.
Yeah. What would you like to see in a pitch? What makes a pitch a 5 for you?
That's a good question. Go ahead, Dimitri. I'm going to gather my thoughts.
The only people who would give a 5 would be usually in the industry, and they have the money. They're an angel investor, and we do have angel investors among our network, of course, of mentors. So it resonates with them that they want to be an angel investor, and oftentimes they might want to be a board member or an advisor or something as well, and use that agreement and move forward as well with some guidelines. A lot of different things could ensue. It's such a rare thing, though, as I mentioned, that the 5 isn't really ever expected. When we do get a 5, it's really like, wow. And then they get excited and they want to invest and support that startup. So what it is what makes the 5 is the person who gives the 5 and the energy and synergy of the startup, rather than just that the pitch is great. Because the common things that can be between a 4 and a 5 would be that the pitch is clear. They let people know what the problem is. They have a clear message. They're not cluttered. They're not walls of text on the slides. So lots of images, lots of personality during the presentation, and then not too many slides, and of course finishing your message in time. So because we time everybody, you don't want that alarm going off and you're still trying to talk about your team or trying to talk about, we always have people put what they want as well. Like, do they want money? If so, how much and what for? Are they looking for a team member or certain team members? If so, what characteristics and why? Are they looking for a certain kind of advisor? If so, what kind and for what purpose? So these are the asks, and you need to get all of your message in before that buzzer rings and you're told to shut up. Otherwise, you haven't had an effective pitch.
I think what Dimitri said, it resonates. It's really an important part of getting to 5 or getting to somebody who agrees with you. It's really about figuring out with your audience how what you are talking about is something that you're excited about, you really want to bring forward. People have trust in you as being the right person to bring that idea forward. So getting to 5 is resonance, it's trust, it's really figuring out what is going to bring, what am I talking about that brings the idea to the point where someone is willing to work on the project. So for me, I'm going to actually contradict Dimitris a little bit. It's not so much about getting everything into the pitch, but it's about for me, it's about slowing down and talking about some of the essential things and telling a story. Why are you doing this? Where are you going with this? What's the problem you're solving? What's your special sauce? What is it that you individually bring to the project that is going to make it successful? And getting that storytelling and those really three things first is essential to getting to that 5. The other stuff needs to follow. You need to be able to tell, why is my project going to work? How are we going to scale? Where am I in my project? But really, the essential part is who are you? What is the problem you're solving? And if you can't get that initial part right, everything else falls apart.
So what is interesting here for me is that you and Dimitris, you agree on a lot of things, so it makes a good pitch, but you seem to also have certain things that you look for that you differ on, right? And maybe the message here is that it also depends on the people that are judging you, right? On the mentors. So
absolutely.
A few mentors might be a great fit for X, and other mentors might not be a great fit for founder X, but for founder Y. So is it here very important to have people running the program that are very widely connected, so they can see, we don't have the right mentor here right now, but I can think of some other mentors that we have wherever that would make a great fit with this founder?
We're always doing this, actually, and sometimes we have that person who hasn't joined us as a mentor yet, but we set the appointment and attend the appointment, and that's a key part of what we do as well, because you need to fill the right holes with the right people, and also sometimes get the right kind of feedback from the right people with the right experience.
Yeah, absolutely, Christian. I think that, so right now for the Frankfurt team, we are 5 directors, 6 with Dimitri now. We have 3 associate directors. So it's a large team. And a good part of the work is really expanding the mentor networks, the people who are active mentoring. We have over 40 active members, overall 80 members that have participated in the program. And we are still looking for people who are good fits, simply because part of it is also the variety of different companies that are coming up. But to a large extent, it's what you're talking about. It's, it's a very subjective, there's some objective parameters that are very important to have in a pitch. There's also a very subjective evaluation on how I, as a mentor or an investor, trust this individual is telling a good story and is capable of, it will have the focus to bring their company forward over the next month, 6 months, 3 years, 5 years to be successful. So that kind of evaluation is very much an individual and personal story. You'll have people who may have expertise in an area and are going to give a very low score during the pitching, and then somebody who has similar expertise will give a very high score. It's perfectly okay to give contradictory advice and contradictory evaluations, because it's the founder's job to then take that information and decide what's valuable for them and where they want to focus.
Yeah. So I would like to thank you two very, very much for your time and for the interview. When people want to check you out, what you're doing, where should they do that?
I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm the only Eugenio Grapa on there, so okay. If you search me on LinkedIn, then definitely connect with me. And if not, we are available via the Founder Institute if somebody joins the program. But for me, LinkedIn is really the place to connect with me.
Same here. So, yeah, definitely on LinkedIn. So make sure to see Dimitris Polychronopoulos and use Oslo, because there are a few others, a couple in the UK and many in Greece. So I'm the only one in Norway.
All right. And I will link to everything we talked about in the show notes below. I might contact you two to get some of the info and the links for that. So again, thank you very, very much. And I wish you all the best with your future endeavors.
Thank you, Christian, for your time also.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.